We're going to be talking about Michigan's marijuana law, the very interesting law affecting you and your neighbors. Right after this, we'll be right back on Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process is provided by Meade Lexus of Southfield and Meade Lexus of Lakeside, offering a large selection of new and pre-owned certified premium vehicles.
The new 2011 Lexus IS. Wheeled precision.
And by WWJ News Radio 950, keeping you up to date with the latest news, traffic, weather, sports, and business information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Live, local, and committed to Michigan's future. News Radio 950, WWJ.
Thank you. I'm Henry Baskin, your host for this edition of Due Process. Today we're going to talk about medical marijuana. Michigan has a law that has been brought to some scrutiny by the Michigan Court of Appeals and by attorneys and advocate groups and others. We're not quite certain what the law says, but we know that Michigan has a medical marijuana law. So, in order to understand it more fully, we've invited two guests. Professor Gerald Fisher from Cooley Law School is with us today, and Robert Mullen from Mullen and Associates here to talk about it. And our insert guest today, remote, will be Brady Zink for the Americans for Safe Access. And I'd like to thank you, attorneys, for taking the time out of your schedules to be down here to explain this law, which is, well, it's tough. I mean, a recent case came out in which there was a 30-page opinion by Judge Peter O'Connell in the Michigan Court of Appeals. People are being arrested. People are being charged with the crime of overuse of medical or marijuana, and there seems to be no clarity in this law that was passed by the state of Michigan. Professor Fisher, I'm going to call you Jerry. Jerry,
please do.
Tell me, when was the law passed and how did it come into being?
It was passed in the process of initiative at the election of November 2008.
All right, so that means a whole bunch of people signed these petitions and said we want to put it on the ballot.
Exactly. And it passed with more than 60% of the vote at that election.
Okay.
So
it had nothing to do with the legislature, it just passed.
That's correct. That's correct. And so it's clear that people of the state of Michigan want to help those people that are suffering and have pain and allow them to use marijuana.
Okay. So, Bob, does marijuana have a palliative effect on people who are using or going through chemotherapy?
Absolutely. And in fact, from a historical standpoint, prior to, I believe it's 1936 when there was a tax on marijuana, which was the first regulation, and then in the 1970s.
And there was a 1936 tax, a state tax?
It was a federal tax.
On marijuana?
It was either 36 or 37 was the first attempt.
That didn't last too long though, did it?
It lasted up, I believe, to 1970 when they had a Controlled Substance Act, which then further regulated marijuana.
I see.
From a historical standpoint, marijuana has been a medicine for many societies. I'm from Lebanese descent, and my grandmother used to tell me, she was from Lebanon, that they had marijuana plants that grew as high as her house, and they used it for medicine.
Well, it's one of Pakistan's big imports, or exports, I should say. But Jerry, how do you argue with the fact that it may have a palliative effect on people who have cancer, going through chemotherapy, so forth and so on?
Honestly, I don't argue with that because the electors have spoken and they want people in that situation to have it, but it isn't that group of people that has become the issue.
Okay.
People that have become the issue are those, so to speak, that are trying to game the system that don't have those problems and still want to.
You mean people trying to profit from it?
Well, some people that want to profit, and some people that want to use it recreationally.
Right.
And they are the people
Well, that's what I meant by profit.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of money involved in it as well.
Exactly.
Yes.
Are there any states that have the similar law that we have, medical marijuana?
Yeah, I can't tell you exactly what the states are, but
There are
the
other
authors of this statute help draft other statutes.
That is
Okay.
correct. You know, the one thing, though, about the abuses by the recreational uses of marijuana, it's no different than other substances that are consumed in our society.
Okay.
I mean, people abuse caffeine, they abuse nicotine, alcohol, sugar. You know, to isolate marijuana and say, well, this is the major problem because of the recreational users. I think the focus needs to get back to patients.
Well, let's go back. I mean, you're trying to tell me that it's no different than eating Twinkies, and I don't think Professor
That-
Fisher would agree.
That's not my point. It wasn't that it's the same substance of those other things that I've just mentioned, but the concept of there being abuses in our system. I'll give you an example. The number one prescribed pill in this country is Vicodin. And we know there's a lot of people abusing Vicodin. And what it goes to is more how Americans are. It's kind of and so to look at marijuana and say that this particular substance is being abused and we have to isolate just this subject, I think we're talking about a whole societal approach to how we do things.
Well, you want to change the culture, I think, because, Jerry, would you agree that as people have said, that marijuana is the prelude to other drugs?
Well, I think there's evidence of that, and
Okay.
of course, the distinction between Vicodin and sugar or the other things that people are ingesting is that marijuana happens to be a Schedule I drug on federal and state statute.
Sorry, the federal government has made it a Schedule I drug, you know, up there with codeine and Vicodin and things such as that, right?
Actually, codeine would be a Schedule II
Right.
drug.
Well, whatever, there
Yeah.
are some Schedule I
Yeah.
drugs. But we get to the issue of alcohol, and which is regulated. The states profit from it. Cigarettes, the states made fortunes in cigarette taxes.
Right.
So I'm trying to understand exactly how Michigan comes down. We have the law, but no one seems to know how to interpret the law.
Well, the law is simple if you look at it in the sense of it allows patients to have either a caregiver assigned to them, which can grow up to 12 plants for them, or they can grow up to 12 plants for themselves. Additionally, they're allowed up to 2.5 ounces of marijuana as medicine that they can possess at any one time.
But you represented two people who
Correct.
allegedly violated the law.
Well, my case was a little different from a factual standpoint because what had happened is the law went into effect December of 2008. There was a window between December of 2008 and April when the Michigan Health Department promulgated rules as far as for the implementing of the initiative.
Right.
So there was this window of time where the law was in effect. So my clients received a recommendation, but what had happened is the actual rules promulgating for the issuing of a medical marijuana card hadn't occurred.
Okay, so it was a timing issue.
A timing issue, because shortly thereafter the card was issued to
Well,
them.
Jerry, what if someone has a card, a medical marijuana card, and someone is licensed to grow, apparently? I don't know what department looks over that. How do you feel about that? Where do you think we should come down? I mean, we seem to have ordinances being passed in various communities,
Right.
which we have a series of laws that are interpreting the main law. Then we have the federal government involved.
Right.
What
Well,
does the federal government have to say about
well,
it?
here's where we are with this now, and Rob is describing the medical marijuana statute, and he's absolutely accurate in what he's saying. Now, what you have to do, though, to really get a feel for this general topic, is to recognize that there's a context for this. You have the medical marijuana statute, but you have state law and federal law that make possession, consumption, growing, and distribution all illegal, and so you have a parallel universe. You have two parallel systems occurring. You've got all this illegal, the general rule, all illegal, and then you have legality within that system.
Right.
Now, here's the real bonus here, is that for law enforcement and government, who can use it legally and who is doing it illegally? If you have a card, you're doing it legally
And in the state of Michigan,
in the state of Michigan.
Right.
But now, here it is. who has a card? Nobody knows because the Department of Community Health can't tell.
They can't tell or issue one.
They can issue the card to the people, but they can't tell law enforcement, for example, or communities
They can't
that
say
these
that-
people have a card.
And there's a
Well,
reason
there's no
why.
registry.
Well, the registry is not available to law enforcement.
Okay.
But there's a reason for that.
What's
I
the
mean,
reason?
you're talking about two groups of people that have had contentious relationships. Patients have been criminalized for most of their lives, and now, you know, the same group that wants them to explain, here, have a card, you know, come forward and register with the police like the Bloomfield Township law. See, I think too much attention is being played to that. And one of the big arguments that governments are using for why we need to know everyone who has a card is that protection of police. But my experience as a criminal defense lawyer is most police officers, when they execute a warrant on a house, have a whole host of information before they enter into the home.
Right.
They do surveillance, investigations, controlled buys, and more often than not, they have confidential informants. If all of this takes place and policing agencies are doing their due diligence, it's not as relevant to know who has medical marijuana cards.
Well,
And it should be voluntary.
Well,
if
if
people
someone-
want to disclose whether or not, because it's a health issue as well, Henry. I mean, we're talking
Well-
about people's health.
let me ask you whether the medical community supports medical marijuana.
There's a split.
Generally.
There's a split
There's
in
a
the
split.
medical. There's a split in the medical community, and it's for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of there's a lot of
overuse?
politics involved, just like the Schedule 1 of medical marijuana. I mean, of marijuana in general. I'd like to say this, that a doctor can write a prescription for morphine,
Right.
for fentanyl, which is 80 times stronger, for even cocaine, but not marijuana.
Well, I didn't know that a doctor could write a prescription for cocaine.
That's true. It's a Schedule 2 narcotic.
I didn't know that. However, when a doctor writes a prescription, Jerry, and says, I'd like my patient to have medical marijuana because it's aiding in certain bodily functions, what is wrong with that?
Well, first of all, the doctor is not writing a prescription.
He's not.
The doctor is only writing a certification that this patient would have some benefit by this drug.
Okay.
And maybe the removal
So
of
it's not a
pain.
prescription,
It's
it's
not a
just a
prescription.
okay.
And there's no indication of quantity.
Well, how does this work then?
Dosage?
You take that from the doctor, you go to a grower and
Well-
say, I'd like to buy some.
Well, first, what you would do is you would get a recommendation. You would fill out the appropriate application with the Michigan Department of Health. Once you did that and you were acknowledged as a registered patient,
Okay.
you would, when you put in your application, you'd do one of two things. You would either list someone as a caregiver who would be the person that would provide your medical marijuana to you, or you would list no caregiver and by default become your own caregiver,
Okay.
allowing you to grow up to 12 plants for your own
We're going to go
medicine.
to break, but isn't the problem we're having, Jerry, is that the federal government has said no,
That's one of the problems.
and the states are saying yes. Now, this reminds me of the gun laws. We have the Second Amendment. We had the incident in Tucson. We have, issues regarding that. Do they get resolved on a state level, or are they going to go to the U.S. Supreme Court? And we're going to take a break
Okay.
to think about it. But while we're going to the U.S. Supreme Court, it's going to take a couple of years.
Yes.
All right. We'll be right back. We're going to take a break on due process. We'll be visiting with our guests and the attorneys. Thank you so much.
Legal referrals and more information on this and other related topics are available on our website at www.dueprocess.tv. There you'll find information on today's program, helpful hints to legal issues, support materials, and lawyer referrals. You can also stream previous episodes of Due Process.
Thank you. We're back on due process talking about Michigan's medical marijuana law and the issues that it presents. And there's some legitimate issues. And I don't think they'll be resolved here because we don't have that much time. But
If anybody could do it, though, Henry, you could.
we're going to join Brady Zink by remote. She's allegedly, apparently a patient who has used or is using or requires the use of medical marijuana. So Brandy, you around? Hi.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us. Tell us about your situation.
Well, I am a patient, but I'm also a patient advocate, and I have been working to bring sensible and responsible medical marijuana legislation for the last 10 years, and I work with a group called Americans for Safe Access.
Okay. Now, are you a user of medical marijuana?
I am a registered patient with the Michigan Department of Community Health.
Okay, you're registered. You can't tell me, what you're, if you were to use it, what would you use it for?
Well, those conditions are confidential, but I'm happy to share with you that I am an epilepsy patient, and I have used cannabis successfully for many years to combat seizures and muscle spasms and chronic pain and many other things.
Was it prescribed by a physician?
Doctors may not prescribe marijuana because it's a Schedule I, but I have had a recommendation from several doctors over the years.
Okay, and you find that it does have a quieting effect, a more palliative effect on your condition?
Absolutely. I have seen, not just from myself, but many other patients, cannabis, as I prefer to call it, is the medicine that my doctor recommends because no other medication that I have tried has been able to stop the seizures and the muscle spasms. And epilepsy is a very misunderstood disease or illness.
Okay. Well, your association is trying to get legislation. We already have a legislation in effect. We have a law, the medical marijuana law. Are you in agreement with that?
Yes, my organization is not currently working on legislation in Michigan. It's a national organization, and we support the rights that patients have under the law. We provide information and support, legal services, and things of that nature.
Okay, Michigan seems to be in a state of confusion as to what exactly the law provides. Have you come across other states where it's clear and concise and that it's respected by the federal and state governments?
Well, there are 14 states plus the District of Columbia that have a medical marijuana law, and many of them are successful. I think in Michigan our law is successful for the vast majority of patients. It seems to be the law enforcement that doesn't like the status quo, that wants to create a problem where there is no problem.
Well, exactly. It's law enforcement that said this is, as described here, a Schedule I, Category 1 drug. So they're saying we have the right to enforce that, and I'm not certain if they've gotten around to how they're going to do that. But we have a case now pending. You heard counsel talk about the case that's in the Michigan Court of Appeals going to the Supreme Court probably. I don't know if your association has filed a brief in support of that.
We have worked with the Michigan Association of Compassion Centers recently to protest the DEA's request to seek the records, the confidential records of patients from the Michigan Department of Community Health.
Well, there was a request by the federal government for those records, I believe. And
Yes, and there is precedent sent from other states, from state of Washington and from Oregon, where the DEA unsuccessfully sought those records, and the state stood up for the rights of the patients and stood up for their state law.
Okay, and
Because the state law is not superseded by the federal law.
Well, there are those who say it is, and that's probably the discussion we're having here. Were you part of the group that sent the petitions around so we could get it on the ballot?
No, I was not involved with that effort.
Okay. So as far as you're concerned, you've seen it work in other states and you see no reason why it shouldn't work in Michigan.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us. I appreciate your point of view. I appreciate what you have said to the attorneys here, and we'll discuss it some more. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good luck to you. Well, you've heard it from a patient. Now, how can you say to this patient it's not helpful? No, it's obviously helpful.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with her, and the reality is, I believe that the way this act was sold in the 2008 election was to help people precisely in her shoes, and people have indicated that they want to help her.
Was the act signed by the governor, or was it? Did it require it?
I don't believe it requires the governor's
I
signature.
don't believe so either.
Yeah.
So, do you think that this new power balance is going to shape this law, change it in any way?
It can have an effect, but it has to be clear that a majority of marijuana, 95% of all marijuana prosecutions are at a state level. And the federal government, Eric Holder, our Attorney General, has come out and said, look, we're really not interested in state medical marijuana use as long as the patients are in compliance with the state law. So in that sense, the federal government has said, you know, we've got more priorities on our plate with our limited funding than arresting or prosecuting medical marijuana patients who are in compliance with state laws that have already passed.
So, but for the fact that the government is trillions of dollars in debt, they would be more involved in this. And you're saying they're not involved.
Well, they might be. I mean, he said there's just other priorities for the federal government. I don't know if they had more money that priority would shift to medical marijuana in people's state, state use.
Jerry, who controls the distribution and the production of alcohol?
State of Michigan, the Liquor Control Commission in Michigan.
So every state does that?
Oh, that I don't know.
Well, the federal government is not interested in that. Ever since Prohibition.
Right.
Ever since
I think it's a state issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you going back all those years, I can't even go back that far, but we tried to stop the use of alcohol. That didn't work. Over time, it just didn't work because people found ways to get around it. Illegal, but they found ways to get around it. So they said, we'll repeal that. Okay? Do you see that happening with this category of drug?
What I see is over time people getting educated. And I will say that it becomes more costly and costly for the state to pursue things like marijuana prosecution, specifically medical marijuana prosecution. I mean, you have to look at it this way. Marijuana is a Schedule I narcotic, but yet it's still a misdemeanor where something like oxycodone is a Schedule II narcotic, and it's a 4-year felony. So there's almost like there's a disingenuousness to the scheduling one of marijuana.
Somebody put it up to level 1. Who did that?
Congress.
The U.S. Congress put it up there.
Congress working with the administrative.
And Vicodin is there too?
A Schedule II.
Right. How did that happen?
Well, basically, you have to remember the time period. It was around 1970 when marijuana was a Schedule I narcotic. We were coming out of the 60s. The country was in a much different time. And, I don't think there's ever been an honest discussion about marijuana as to where it ended up as a Schedule I. And I'll give you an example of this. There is a marijuana product called Marinol, which is a Schedule III narcotic, and you can
same effect.
Well, the primary ingredient THC is what's used in Marinol, and Marinol is used to treat nausea. It's for like AIDS patients that have wasting away disease to stimulate appetite, and so the government kind of is giving you both sides of it. On the one side, they're saying, the plant marijuana is a Schedule I narcotic, but yet the primary ingredient in Marinol, THC, is a Schedule III, and a physician can prescribe that.
Yeah, but I'm hearing the professors say we have an issue here. We have a federal issue. And what is superior, federal law or state law? When it competes with federal law seems to always trump state law.
Well, we know the supremacy clause, and us that are lawyers, we can't deny that it exists, and that in areas in which are constitutional, the federal government would preempt state laws.
Well, do you think this is unconstitutional for the federal government to require the names and prescribe the use of this drug?
I don't think it would be unconstitutional to prescribe the use of the drug in the sense that if they were to declassify it as from a Schedule I to a Schedule II. I think ultimately that's what needs to happen. So the proper FDA regulation of it and doctors having the ability to actually write prescriptions, a lot of the things that we're arguing about that are problems that people perceive with our Medical Marijuana Act would be eliminated if that happened.
Well, Jerry, in view of the state of the law now, is there any doctor that's going to write a certificate and say, it's okay for you to use it?
Yes. In Michigan, there are many doctors, or at least several.
But aren't they facing prosecution?
No. Well, they could be prosecuted under federal law.
But state law are one of the prosecutors in one of the counties and the sheriff. They're saying we don't believe this is valid. We believe that if you have it, you're subject to whatever. So I don't understand how doctors are going to prescribe it, how growers are going to grow it, and people are going to use it openly.
Well, we know that there are some 80,000 applications or certifications that are out there. And so for each certification or an application, there's a doctor involved, and so we've had that number of doctors that are willing to step up and do it.
Now, they're not in jeopardy, though, right?
Well, they could be in jeopardy under federal law, conceivably.
Oh, jeez.
But, you know,
It sounds like the wiretap statute in
Yeah.
Michigan and federal.
but getting back to your point about the alcohol and relating that to the Michigan marijuana statute, there's I think a significant point here to be made.
Go ahead. Rick.
And that is that with alcohol, you have an age restriction.
Well, while we're going on, thank you for being here and spending your time with us, because this is really an interesting subject. So go ahead.
Yeah, but so under the alcohol, we have an age restriction. But you have to be a certain age. Under this statute, you can have it as a child. It hasn't been a debate.
Neither is
Major funding for Due Process is provided by Mead Lexus of Southfield and Mead Lexus of Lakeside, offering a large selection of new and pre-owned certified premium vehicles.
The new 2011 Lexus IS. Wheeled precision.
And by WWJ News Radio 950, keeping you up to date with the latest news, traffic, weather, sports, and business information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Live, local, and committed to Michigan's future. News Radio 950, WWJ.